Marlon Brando cheated for 40 years. The women who paid for it never made the headlines. Imagine you almost die. Not a car accident, not an illness. You almost die because of a medical procedure that the man you love arranged, quickly, cheaply, because he did not want the child the two of you had created to into the world. You lose blood. You lie there. You're not sure you will make it to the next morning. But you survive. And when you have enough strength to stand up, enough strength to walk, enough strength to go back to his house, because you love him, because you still love him, despite everything that just happened, you open the door, and you see another woman, right there, in his house. No explanation offered, no attempt to hide it, no look on his face that suggested he understood what he had done, or what you had just been through 3 days before, as if you had not almost died because of him. That was the night Rita Moreno swallowed an entire bottle of sleep inside Marlon Brando's bedroom. The man that all of Hollywood worshipped like a god. The man that every newspaper called a genius. The man that millions of women around the world dreamed of simply standing close to. And the woman who actually stood close to him, close enough to almost die because of him, was lying unconscious on the floor of his house while he continued his life as if nothing had happened. Brando did not change after that night. Not one thing. Now I need you to know something before we go any further. Rita Moreno was not the only one. There were 3 wives. All of them ended in the same direction. There were other women whose names do not appear in any of the 12 books he published, women who do not appear in any of the tributes that ran when he died, women who were carefully and professionally removed from every official version of his story. And there were 2 children. One of them ended her because she could not keep living after what happened inside her father's house. 25 years old, on an island far from everything, alone. The father did not attend the funeral. He was alive. He was not ill. He simply did not go. Marlon Brando cheated for 40 years. Not once. Not because he fell in love with the wrong person. Not because his marriages were unhappy. 40 years. Systematic, patterned, repeated with each woman in exactly the same sequence. And when you see that sequence laid out from beginning to end, you cannot call it anything other than what it is. He was the greatest acting talent of the 20th century. That is true. No one disputes it. But here is what no video has ever said directly. The very thing that made him a genius, the ability to read other people's emotions, to identify exactly which point was most vulnerable, to create a feeling of connection strong enough to make someone trust him completely, was precisely what he used to do everything you are about to hear. He was not only performing on screen, he was performing 24 hours a day with real people inside a real life. And when that performance finally ended, the people who had been standing closest to him paid for it with everything they had. The armor. When genius becomes permission. To understand why nobody said anything for 4 decades, you need to understand what Brando had that no other man in this kind of story ever had. Bob Hope was protected by the Paramount Pictures publicity machine, an external system that could be dismantled. Mickey Rooney was protected by MGM's money and institutional power, something that could be lost. Brando did not need any studio to cover for him. His protection was invisible and far more durable than anything a publicity department could construct. His protection was the worship of an entire generation. In 1951, Hollywood had one way of acting. You memorized your lines, you hit your marks, you delivered the correct emotion at the correct moment in the correct way the director required. It was a craft, precise, repeatable, and controlled. Then, Brando walked onto the set of a streetcar named Desire and did something no one had seen before. He did not perform the character. He became the character. He stopped mid-sentence, not because the script required a pause, but because that was when the thought actually arrived. He moved his body in ways no choreographer had planned, because that is how a man in that situation would genuinely move. He found the silences that other actors filled with noise, and he let them sit there, uncomfortable and real. Co-stars said it was impossible to work around. Directors said it could not be controlled. Studios said it was a liability, and audiences called it genius. That word, genius, is the most important word in this entire story. Not because it was inaccurate, it was accurate, but because of what it quietly permitted. When you are a genius, your cruelty is reframed as complexity. Your emotional unavailability is reframed as artistic depth. Your pattern of leaving people devastated is classified as the inevitable consequence of standing too close to a very large fire. Brando understood this. Whether it was conscious or not, he operated behind that label for 40 years. Journalists who witnessed his behavior on set wrote about it as eccentricity. Women who experienced his behavior in private had no language to describe it that anyone would take seriously. And the entire industry that depended on his name attached to a project had every financial reason to look in the other direction. But here's the thing that no one talks about. The specific skill that made him extraordinary on screen, the ability to read exactly what another person is feeling, to find the precise emotional pressure point, to manufacture a sense of connection so convincing that it registers as completely real. That is not a skill that turns off when the cameras stop. He brought it home. He used it on every person who ever loved him. Genius and weapon, in Brando's case, were the same instrument. The Boy Who Learned to Perform Love, Omaha, Nebraska, 1924. His father, Marlon Brando Sr., was a man who believed that warmth was weakness. Not a single document from Brando's childhood records his father offering him praise. Not one. His mother, Dorothy, everyone called her Dodie, was talented, sensitive, and drinking heavily enough that the teenage Marlon regularly had to walk into bars late at night to find her and bring her home. He failed out of school. He was expelled from a military academy for sneaking out after hours. He followed his older sisters to New York City with almost nothing in his pocket and no plan beyond the vague sense that he did not belong in Omaha. In New York, he found a woman named Stella Adler. She was one of the most respected acting teachers in the country. She taught him the Stanislavski system, the technique of living truthfully inside imaginary circumstances, of finding the real emotional experience inside the fiction. And for the first time in his life, someone told him he was extraordinary. He later said that Adler was the only person in the industry he genuinely respected. He said she changed his understanding of what acting could be. What he did not say, but what the rest of his life suggests clearly, is that she gave him something he had been starving for since childhood: the feeling of being seen. The problem was not that he found it. The problem was that he never learned how to generate it from inside himself. He only knew how to extract it from other people. And once a person had given him enough of it, the hunger moved on to someone new. He did not do this because he was deliberately cruel. He did it because a child who never receives unconditional love does not learn what unconditional love looks like. He learns to perform it. He learns to seek it. And he never learns how to give it back in a way that does not eventually cost the other person everything. That childhood built the actor. It also built everything that came after. And the first person to find that out was a 21-year-old woman on a film set in Los Angeles in 1954. Rita Moreno. 8 years of the same pattern. Rita Moreno was not easy to deceive. By 1954, she was already a working professional in the most competitive industry in the world. She had grown up in Puerto Rico and come to New York as a child. She had been navigating Hollywood's particular cruelties since she was a teenager. She understood what men in this industry typically wanted from young women, and she had learned to recognize it. She did not recognize what Brando did. Because it was not the standard routine, he did not offer the rehearsed compliments or the obvious invitations. He paid attention to her differently. He remembered details she mentioned only once. He asked questions in the manner of someone who was genuinely listening to the answers, not simply waiting for his turn to speak. He had a way of making a person feel, in the middle of a conversation, that they were the most important thing happening in the room. In her memoir, Rita Moreno described the early years of their relationship with a clarity that makes them harder to read, not easier. She was not describing a villain. She was describing someone who knew precisely what to say to make another person feel completely understood. Then the pattern started, intense attention, the kind that makes you restructure your sense of self around the presence of another person. Then, a slow withdrawal. Then, visible indifference, sometimes involving other women directly in front of her, sometimes simply a silence that offered no explanation and invited no response. Then, exactly when the withdrawal became unbearable, the attention would return, warmer than before, more convincing than before. Psychologists have a name for this cycle. Rita Moreno did not have access to that name in 1954. She had 8 years of the cycle instead. And during those 8 years, she continued working. She continued building a career that the rest of the world could see. In 1961, she won the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress for West Side Story. It remains one of the most celebrated performances in the history of the ceremony. She accepted that award while a relationship was slowly taking everything she had and returning nothing. That does not make the story less tragic. It makes it more tragic, because it proves he was not destroying her completely. He was destroying her precisely enough to keep the arrangement going. The most chilling part of what Brando did was never the dramatic moments. It was the calibration. The bottle. In the early 1960s, Rita Moreno became pregnant. She told Brando. He made clear that he did not want the child. He arranged a procedure, quickly and through a doctor whose qualifications Rita had no ability to evaluate because she trusted that he had chosen correctly. She'd been trusting his choices for 7 years. This was simply one more. The procedure went seriously wrong. She lost a dangerous amount of blood. She came close to not surviving it. She did survive. She spent days recovering. And when she was well enough to return to his house, because she still loved him, because that is what the previous 7 years had done to her sense of what love required, she opened the door. There was another woman inside. Not in a separate room, not a friend with an innocent explanation standing in the kitchen. Another woman in a situation that required no explanation at all, making no effort to pretend otherwise. Rita Moreno had almost died 3 days earlier. She was standing in his doorway, and he had not changed his schedule. She later described that moment, standing at the threshold of his house, still physically recovering from what had happened, looking at what was in front of her. As the moment, something inside her broke completely. Not dramatically, not loudly, the way a bone breaks under sustained pressure that finally exceeds what it can hold. That night, she swallowed the entire contents of a bottle of sleep. Inside his house, in his bedroom, with his name on the lease and his belongings on every surface. Someone found her in time. In the weeks that followed, Marlon Brando, the most celebrated actor on the planet, a man whose emotional intelligence was considered so extraordinary that film critics wrote academic essays about it, continued exactly as he had before. Not one documented change, not one letter, not one statement in any interview that connects what happened in his house to anything he had done. A woman who loved him nearly died in his bedroom. He treated it as something that had happened to her, not to them, not because of him. to her. I do not have a way to make that detail smaller than it actually is. What happened to Rita Moreno after? Here is what Rita Moreno did after she left. She married a cardiologist named Leonard Gordon. They were together for 45 years until his death in 2010. She built a career that no performer in American history had previously achieved. Oscar, Tony, Emmy, Grammy. All four of the highest awards in American performance. One person. All four. Decades later, in an interview, she was asked whether she regretted the relationship. She thought about it for a moment. Then she said she had loved him, that it was real, that it had also nearly destroyed her, and that she had spent many years deciding, slowly and deliberately, that those two things did not cancel each other out. She did not call him a monster. She described him as a man who was damaged in a specific way, who never found a way to repair that damage, and who distributed the consequences among the people who came closest to him. That is not a small distinction. She also said this, that he had taught her, through 8 years of concrete evidence, what she would never accept from anyone again. That was the only genuinely useful thing he gave her. He never gave it to anyone else, because the women who came after Rita Moreno did not leave. They signed documents, they had children. They were bound in ways that made leaving a much longer and more damaging process. 3 wives, 1 pattern. During his 8 years with Rita Moreno, Brando also got married. 3 times, to 3 different women. The endings of those 3 marriages share a consistency that is too precise to be coincidence. Anna Kashfi, October 1957. They were married in a ceremony that Brando described in contradictory ways at different points in his life. By 1959, less than 2 years later, Kashfi filed for divorce, citing emotional cruelty. What followed was a custody battle over their son Christian that lasted more than a decade and was described by people close to it as one of the most sustained and damaging conflicts they had witnessed in the industry. People who observed that custody battle noted something particular about how Brando fought it. He was rarely present as a father during the periods when he had access to Christian. He did not attend school events. He did not maintain consistent contact. But he pursued the legal battle with a ferocity that seems disconnected from parenting entirely. What he could not tolerate was the idea that something he considered his could belong to someone else. Anna Kashfi spent the years following their divorce struggling with substance dependency. She wrote about the marriage and its aftermath in a memoir that received little attention at the time of its publication. Movita Castaneda, 1960. They married in secret. 2 years later, they divorced in silence. The historical record contains almost nothing about what happened between those 2 dates. She has described the relationship with a restraint that itself communicates more than any detailed account could. Tarita Teripaya, 1962. Brando met her while filming Mutiny on the Bounty in Tahiti. He was 38 years old. She was 20. He was one of the most famous men on earth. She was a young woman from a Tahitian family who had been cast in the film as a local dancer. He pursued her with the full force of his attention. He bought an island, 14 small atolls in the South Pacific, 27 miles north of Tahiti, called Tetiaroa. He married her. He told her they would build a life there. From the outside, it looked like the great romantic gesture of a man finally finding peace. From the inside, according to what Tarita described in later years, it felt like a beautiful location where she was expected to remain stationary while he moved freely. The affairs continued. The absences continued. The attention that had originally pulled her in receded and was not replaced with anything consistent. They divorced in 1972. He kept the island. She kept their 2 children, a son named Simon and a daughter named Cheyenne. And the children kept the damage. 3 women, 3 marriages, 3 endings that moved in exactly the same direction. This is not a pattern of bad luck. This is a pattern of behavior that never changed because the man at the center of it never had any reason to change it. He faced no professional consequences. He faced no social consequences. He faced no legal consequences. He simply moved to the next person. The one he never left. After everything you have just heard, I want to tell you about the one person in Marlon Brando's life he never walked away from. It was not any of his wives. It was not Rita Moreno. It was not any of the women whose names appear in this story. His name was Wally Cox. Cox was not famous in the way that Brando was famous. He was a gentle, soft-spoken actor and comedian. Every description of him uses words like mild, quiet, warm. He was precisely the kind of man that Hollywood in the 1950s had no use for as an image. He and Brando had shared an apartment in New York in the late 1940s before either of them had built the careers they were going to build. They had been friends for more than 20 years. Wally Cox died in February 1973. He was 48 years old. What happened to Brando after that death surprised even the people who thought they understood him. He obtained a portion of Cox's ashes. He brought them home. He placed them in his bedroom, and they stayed there for 31 years. People who were close to Brando during that period have said that he sometimes wore Cox's pajamas, that he kept photographs of Cox alongside the ashes, that he spoke about Cox in a way he never spoke about anyone else, without performance, without the careful management of image that characterized almost every other relationship in his life. When Brando himself died in July 2004, his ashes were mixed with Cox's and scattered in 2 locations, Death Valley and Tetiaroa, the island he had bought for a woman he eventually left alone on it. He could not stay for any of his wives. He could not be consistently present for any of his children. He could not maintain a relationship with any of the women in this story without eventually causing damage that altered the course of their lives. But he kept the ashes of a quiet, gentle man in his bedroom for 31 years. The one relationship in Brando's life that he could not control, could not exit on his own timeline, and could not damage through his own behavior, was the one that had already ended. The one person he could not lose again was the one who was already gone. There's something in that fact that tells you more about Marlon Brando than any performance he ever gave. He knew what love was supposed to feel like. He had experienced it with one person in his entire life, and the reason that relationship survived everything else was that the other person was no longer alive to be hurt by it. The night on Mulholland Drive, May 16, 1990, evening. Marlon Brando's home sat on Mulholland Drive in Los Angeles, a property with views across the city, bought during the years when his name alone could open any door in Hollywood. That night, inside the living room of that house, his son Christian shot and killed a man named Dag Drolet. Christian Brando was 32 years old. Dag Drolet was 26. Dag was the boyfriend of Cheyenne Brando, Marlon's daughter with Rita, who was 4 months pregnant with Dag's child at the time. Christian had been drinking. He later told police he had confronted Dag because Cheyenne had told him she was being abused by Dag. Accounts of exactly what happened in that room in the minutes before the shooting have never been fully consistent. What is documented is that Christian had a gun and that Dag Drolet died in that living room on that evening. Brando hired a legal team. He appeared in court and made a personal statement asking for leniency in his son's sentencing. He spoke about Christian's difficult childhood, about his own failures as a father, about the circumstances that had produced the person who stood before the court. Christian was convicted of voluntary manslaughter. He was sentenced to 10 years. He served 5. But the person who did not recover, the person who had been sitting in a room adjacent to that living room when it happened, who was carrying a child at the time, who had told her brother what she told him, was Cheyenne. She was diagnosed with schizophrenia, complicated by substance dependency in the years following the shooting. Her son, Tukey, Dag's child, born after the shooting, was removed from her custody by French Polynesian authorities. The father of her child was dead. Her half-brother was in prison. She was living between Tahiti and France, diagnosed and medicated, and without the one thing, the child she had carried, that might have given her a reason to remain anchored. On April 16, 1995, at her mother's home in Tahiti, Cheyenne Brando ended her. She was 25 years old. Marlon Brando did not attend her funeral. He was alive. He was not hospitalized. He was not physically incapacitated in any documented way. He did not attend his daughter's funeral. No public statement was recorded explaining why. No letter was released. No spokesperson offered a reason on his behalf. Rita buried her daughter, alone, on the island that the man who had once promised her a life had purchased, named, and then left her to inhabit without him. I want you to stay with that image for a moment. Not the funeral specifically, the island. He had bought it as a grand romantic gesture. He had named it and claimed it, and built the mythology of a man seeking peace and beauty and a simpler way of living. And then he had left the woman he brought there to exist on it alone, raising children who carried the weight of a father who appeared and disappeared according to his own internal schedule, accountable to no one. For 40 years, everything Brando did that caused harm was emotional. It was invisible. It was the kind of damage that leaves no physical evidence, that cannot be brought before a court, that can always be attributed to the sensitivity of the person who experienced it, rather than the behavior of the person who caused it. On the night of May 16, 1990, that changed. Not because Brando pulled the trigger, he did not, but because the children who had grown up in the particular darkness he created, the absences, the manipulation, the pattern of behavior repeated across every relationship in their lives as a model of what relationships looked like, had grown old enough for that darkness to take a shape of its own. The harm he caused did not disappear. It was never going to disappear. It was simply waiting for the next generation to carry it. The island. In his final years, Brando rarely left his home on Mulholland Drive. He spent time in anonymous online chat rooms under names no one recognized, talking to strangers who had no idea who they were talking to. This was, apparently, what he preferred by then. Connection without identification, conversation without history. He weighed more than 370 pounds. He had diabetes, congestive heart failure, and a series of complications that his body had accumulated across 8 decades of a life lived entirely on his own terms. His room was never fully dark because he preferred some light. He had a refrigerator that his staff occasionally chained shut to manage his diet. He had people who found, the following morning, evidence that someone had thrown food over his fence at his request during the night. In 2001, a journalist attempted to reach him for an interview. She received a fax in response. The fax stated that Marlon Brando was unavailable. It was signed by Dr. Tim. Dr. Tim was one of his 2 English mastiffs. That detail has stayed with me throughout the writing of this story, even at the very end, even with everything else that had happened, even with 2 children gone, and 3 failed marriages, and the long record of what had been done and left undone. The performance continued. The fax signed by the dog. He had been performing since he was a teenager in New York, doing whatever it took to make the room respond to him. And he never stopped. Not for his wives, not for his children. Not in a courtroom asking for leniency for a son convicted of manslaughter. Not on a fax machine to a journalist he had no intention of speaking with. The performance was the only consistent thing in his life. On July 1st, 2004, Marlon Brando died of respiratory failure at a hospital in Los Angeles. He was 80 years old. His estate faced more than 24 pending lawsuits and had almost nothing left to resolve them with. The island of Tetiaroa was eventually sold. Today, it is home to a luxury resort where villas begin at several $1,000s per night. Brando's ashes are scattered there, mixed with the ashes of Wally Cox. In 2008, Christian Brando died of pneumonia in a public hospital. He was 49 years old. He had almost nothing to his name. He had 3 children of his own. He had spent the better part of his adult life attempting to reconcile the violence of a single night in 1990 with the person he had been before it and the person he was trying to become after it. He did not fully get there. The record. Marlon Brando published 12 books during his lifetime. 12. Not one of those books contains the name Rita Moreno in the context of what happened between them. Not one of them refers to what she experienced. Not one of them acknowledges that a woman he was with for 8 years nearly died inside his house, and that he did not change his behavior in response. Anna Kashfi is referenced in one of them, briefly in the context of a legal dispute. Not as a person, as a problem that was managed. Rita Terapia appears as a setting, almost, the woman associated with the beautiful island, not the woman left alone on it, not the woman who buried her daughter without him. Cheyenne is not discussed in any depth. Neither is what the structure of his family, the absences, the divided households, the children raised in the aftermath of his decisions, produced in the people those children became. This is not an accident of memory or an oversight of composition. This is 40 years of sustained, deliberate management of the record. The same machine that performed on screen, performing in print. Controlling what was seen. Controlling what was remembered. Constructing a version of a life in which the people who paid the highest price are not present in any significant way. The record he left behind is largely the record he constructed, and for a long time, it almost worked completely. Almost. Because Rita Moreno wrote her own memoir. Because court documents are public. Because the people who were there, the staff, the colleagues, the people who witnessed the specific reality of who he was when the camera stopped, did not all stay silent forever. And because of this, we still watch The Godfather. We still teach On the Waterfront in film schools around the world. We still reach for his name when we want to describe the highest standard of what screen performance can be. All of that is true. None of it is wrong. The performances are real. The craft is real. The influence on everything that came after is documented and legitimate. But Rita Moreno carried what he gave her for 8 years and nearly died from it. Anna Kashfi spent years rebuilding a life that a decade of legal warfare had depleted. Rita buried a daughter without him on an island he named but did not stay for. Christian died at 49 in a public hospital with almost nothing. Cheyenne was 25 years old. 25. What we celebrate and what we leave out of the celebration are both choices. I am not telling you which choice to make. I'm asking whether you are making it consciously. Because the people in this story were not supporting cast. They were not footnotes. They were not the collateral cost of genius that we are simply expected to absorb without comment. They were real people who existed in the specific orbit of one man's inability to love anyone in a way that did not eventually cost them something they could not afford to lose. And they have been kept out of the record long enough. Rita Moreno said she did not regret loving him, that she had made peace with what it cost her and what she built after, that she looked back on those years not with bitterness, but with the clarity of someone who survived something that should have been unsurvivable and decided to use what she learned. She is in her 90s. She is still working. She still talks about that period of her life with a directness that most people never find about anything. She won. By every measure that matters, she won. But I want you to think about what it means that winning, for her, looked like surviving him. And I want you to think about Cheyenne, 25 years old, on an island, in her mother's house, after losing everything, her boyfriend, her son, her brother to prison, and the father who had never managed to stay. She did not get to win. She did not get to write the memoir. She did not get to sit in the interview chair 60 years later and describe what she learned. She did not get the 4 awards, or the second act, or the 45 years with someone who actually stayed. She got 25 years, and then she was gone. And her father did not go to the funeral. That is the part of Marlon Brando's legacy that does not appear in the highlight reels. That is the part that has been waiting, quietly, to be said. Leave a comment below. Rita Moreno said she does not regret loving him, even though it nearly killed her. You tell me, is that strength? Or is it something else entirely? Because I have been sitting with that question for a long time, and I genuinely want to know what you think.